Once Christianity had achieved legitimacy in the eyes of the civil power, it went on to build the church as an institution that is both public and subordinate, offering its jurisdiction not as an alternative to Caesar's, but as a discipline for the care of the human soul, rather than the government of civil society. Although the church was often in conflict with the secular power, it never departed from the doctrine of the two swords announced by Pope Gelasius at the end of the 5th century. According to this doctrine, God has granted jurisdiction to the church over men's souls, but to the temporal powers over the day-to-day business of the community. When the two swords are wielded by a single hand, as in the Spain of Ferdinand and Isabella, the England of Henry VIII, or the Rome of the Farnese papacy, or the Geneva of John Calvin, the result is a period of abnormality and upheaval, often manifest in cruel persecutions that are, one likes to think, far from the spirit of Christian charity. Two other historical factors played a role in the development of secular jurisdictions, both stemming from the fertile interaction of Christianity and Roman law. The first is the emergence of the person as a moral idea. The word persona, which is of Etruscan origin, originally meant a mask, as worn on the theatrical stage. Hence, in due course, it came to mean the character in a drama. And this word was appropriated by the Roman law to denote the litigating subject, defined by his rights and duties and recognised as an independent agent. The legal person was not necessarily a human being. Societies, fraternities and corporations in due course acquired legal personality, as did churches. And the human individual, seen as a legal person, was an artefact. So that, as Sir Ernest Barker once put it, it is not the natural ego which enters a court of law, it is a right and duty-bearing person, created by the law, which appears before the law. Nevertheless, when an individual sought judgment in the Roman courts, the mask that he wore was also identical with himself. Hence, contained within the idea of the legal person were those of individual responsibility and individual right. Defined by Boethius as an individual substance of a rational nature, the person was later identified by Aquinas as the human essence, that in which individuality, intellect, and the moral life are all united and incarnate. Aquinas argued that the crucial part of the soul which governs our destiny and happiness, and in which personhood resides, is the rational part, the intellect, and it is in virtue of their reason that human beings are autonomous sources of activity, spontaneously initiating events for which they are also accountable. That is what we mean or ought to mean by personality, and Aquinas goes on to develop a theory of the person as the highest form of creation, in which freedom, reason, accountability and self-knowledge are given the kind of prominent position that they were later to regain from a completely different metaphysical perspective in Kant. The other historical input deriving from the interaction of Roman law and Christianity is the idea of natural law. This natural law, which was recognised by the Roman lawyers, was not a separate system of law, but a set of philosophical precepts inherited from the Stoics. Its theoretical importance, however, was far greater than its practical effect, for it gave credence to the view that there is a law contained in the nature of things that could be discovered by human reason, and which was therefore the universal property of mankind. Moreover, according to a highly influential summary of the natural law given in the 7th century by Isidore of Seville, there is a natural law of universal liberty which prohibits slavery. This had, in fact, already been recognised by the early church, because the early church expanded largely among the slave population and had made manumission, or the freeing of slaves, into a religious duty. Theories of natural law were derived in the Middle Ages. Theories of natural law were revived in the Middle Ages following the 12th century decretum, in which someone known as Gratian summarised the Roman law inheritance and amalgamated it with biblical and ecclesiastical teachings. Thereafter, it was generally assumed that all law either contains or is measured against the natural law, which is discovered by reason and implanted in us by God. Theories of natural law were revived in the Middle Ages, with St. Thomas once again leading the way, advocating natural law as the basis not only of moral conduct, but also of the first principles of government. The effect of this was to place the free individual at the heart of politics. The individual was both the subject of government and the purpose of it. This emphasis on the individual brought to political fruition a moral and theological idea that we find in many patristic writings. And it could fairly be identified as the principal political legacy of the Christian faith. Combined with the philosophy of the person, the theory of natural law and the institutions of secular government, this emphasis on the individual led by its intrinsic logic to the belief in natural rights. We all of us, on the Christian view, have rights which belong to us as human beings, which precede any particular political arrangement and which provide a test of its legitimacy. Regimes which invade or violate the right to life, limb and family, which enslave our bodies or attempt to compel our faith, are regimes that transgress the boundaries of legitimate order. So, just to summarise that history, the Old Testament presents us with a set of prohibitions, thou shalt not. The New Testament presents us with a pair of duties, and the natural law presents us with a set of rights. And this progression from prohibition through duty to right is contained within the dynamic of Christianity, and when reworked by Kant so as to discard the implicit theological premise, takes on the form that is now most familiar to us in Western societies today, the form of a universal moral law based in the sanctity of the individual. We rightly regard this as a fundamental part of our European heritage, but we seldom see that it is not an invention of the Enlightenment, but is contained in a revelation granted 2,000 years ago in a Middle Eastern province of the Roman Empire. And that piece of history suggests a way in which religious freedom might be conceptualized. First, religious freedom is possible only if the claims of religion are circumscribed. To grant to a religion the freedom to extinguish religious freedom is not to grant religious freedom. A religion that makes the extinction of religious freedom into a sacred duty is not one that can be tolerated in a liberal jurisdiction, except as a minority pursuit of half-believers. Secondly, religious freedom is sustainable only if the spheres of religion and politics are sufficiently distinct, and the obligations of religion are sufficiently removed from the everyday aims of government. Religions which claim serious law-making powers are themselves threats to religious freedom, unless those laws are confined explicitly to the private life and free association of believers and are removed from the public sphere. Thirdly, while religious freedom requires the separation of state and civil society, it does not require the total disestablishment of religion, nor the removal of all religious rights from the public institutions of a country. The important thing is not to prevent the official endorsement of one religion, but to promote the official permission of others. The state can make public acknowledgement of the majority faith while upholding the religious freedom of minorities. All that is necessary is that the majority religion should itself permit this. Christianity manifestly both permits religious freedom and requires it. Islam, however, is only dubiously can be said of Islam that it either requires or really permits this kind of freedom. Finally, no grant of religious freedom should overlook the deep importance of faith in the life of the believer. In granting this freedom, you're not granting a simple permission to do some trivial thing. You're granting the right to shape one's life and the life of one's family according to a complete and comprehensive plan, which is, of course, why religious freedom is such a difficult thing to grant. This right cannot be granted without permitting many things that the atheist culture finds offensive. The right to pray, to worship, to persuade, the right to acknowledge God in one's daily life, and to dedicate one's thoughts and deeds in public gestures. Hence, religious freedom, even when it can be granted, will press up against the very limits of the space in which our freedoms are exercised. And if it can be granted at all, it is only because a particular religious tradition has both occupied that space and also relinquished it. The tradition that has done that for us is the Christian tradition. If we value religious freedom, therefore, we should value that tradition as its guarantee. Should the atheist culture ever triumph, so that the voice of Christianity is silenced in our public life, this would not, I think, be a gain in religious freedom, but a loss of it, for it would leave the field open to the two contestants that are now seeking to claim it, militant atheism and militant Islam, both of which regard their critics as their enemies.